On this edition of the program, Donald Trump's approval ratings. Yipes. And we get a little look at the economy with JD Durkin. It's a small episode for your weekend as you begin the holidays here in America. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for November 21st, 2021, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young. It may as well be 2021 as far as I'm concerned. Oh my God. Guys, I've been more places than Joe Hendry's theme song. I don't even know where the hell I am. London, San Francisco, somewhere in between lies my house, and I'm almost positive that I'm there right now. But my body is saying it may be time to nap or it's time to stay up all night. No clue. I got in last night from SF about midnight. I had a very interesting sleep chart on my watch as it recognized that I was sleeping on the plane. And then I was up for an hour and then I went down and then the baby was up around 5:45. So look, a lot going on. And unfortunately, that has taken a little toll out of this episode. Number one, it's late. So apologies, but it'll be there for you. Weekend. And there's not a ton. Mom Donnie's meeting with Trump, but we're not going to have that by the time that this comes out. So this is a good time to catch up. And the news is kind of slowing down. Not a lot of news gets broken in December. Everybody is kind of hither and yon going to family stuff. But there is one reality. And that is Donald Trump's approval rating. No less than 3 polls had him recognizing his lowest approval rating of his second term. Now, some of this is not shocking. Presidents in their second term tend to hit a little bit of a souring point at some point after their first 90 days in office. You get like one last potent pump. And then everybody starts to, look forward. As we say on this show, all power is future power in this world. And now people begin to see the end of your fire hose of future power. Now, on the Republican side, he's still going to have a hold because he's a movement leader and his endorsement is still going to matter a lot. But in terms of public perception, things ain't been good. A lot of it revolves around the economy. The idea that affordability has reached a metastasized point. Donald Trump was given leeway around the economy because there was a belief that he would do better. And at least now we're starting to see his approval rating creep from the mid 40s, which is like okay for him historically, to, in some cases, the high 30s, which is where he spent the majority of his first term. But in comparison, people said, okay, well, he was in the high 30s in his first term because he had the Russia stuff, he had the Ukraine stuff. The Democrats were constantly inventing stuff to throw at him. He doesn't have the same excuse this time. He has largely defined his own narrative. In fact, the only thing that the Democrats have been able to lace in his direction is the Epstein files, which was a problem of his own making. Other than that, he owns the economy. The economy has been affected by the tariffs. The Democrats have been able to effectively message that the tariffs are not for you. They are just Donald Trump causing chaos, and you are the victim And so all of the hottest economy in the world, everything is great. The golden age, it rings hollow right now for independents. Because Donald Trump hasn't really lost any steam off his fastball with Republicans, nor has he become any more popular or less popular with the Democrats. Those numbers have stayed remarkably similar. It's independents that have begun to look at him and say, geez, I forgot. It's this guy again. Now, what happens through the holidays? What happens at the beginning of next year? We will have to see. But we do look at the numbers, and the numbers ain't good for Donald Trump's approval rating, at least right now. All right, let's go ahead and throw it to our friend live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the one and only JD Durkin. Joining us live from the trading floor, it is JD Durkin. We got to get into this economic outlook because a lot going on. JD, how you doing? Doing great.
Long-time listener, also long-time caller. Nice to be back on the show with you, my man. Things are great.
Let's kind of get into this week. For the first time, there have been a lot of like happy days are here again, endless boom for the stock market, up and up and up. It seemed like we had weathered, at least from the market perspective, the Liberation Day worries earlier in the spring and through the summer, record highs. And then at some point around like Wednesday of a week and a half ago, those fears, those anxieties of a AI bubble that could collapse the entire economy, it seems like that has been abated after NVIDIA's earnings, but give us the rundown.
Yeah, man, I always say this is like drinking from a fire hose. I used to think just covering regular politics was drinking from a fire hose down on my Capitol Hill days, and then here I come, I pivot back to the financial markets, and I'm thinking, oh, man, this is great. There's a bell at 9:30. There's a bell at 4 o'clock.
Yep.
No news breaks after that. And for the most part, that's still true. But yeah, this has been just an absolute wild. I mean, we've all had just total whiplash down here. Those of us that are silly enough to cover the ins and outs of the stock market every day and trying to connect the dots between the frantic morass of the financial markets. But, all this drives on a narrative. And I think that's kind of one of the more important parts of all this. And the narrative can shift from bull market to bear market cycle, which could be 2 or 3 years, or the narrative can shift as we saw yesterday on Wall Street, Thursday, November 20th. It could shift in just a few hours. And after NVIDIA and Jensen Huang reported on Wednesday, it seemed as if he had done enough to assuage the concerns about potential bubble talk or overvaluation, because it's one thing to report very solidly quarterly earnings, but really what the algorithms, the power brokers on Wall Street want to know about is your forecast or your guidance for the future.
Yeah.
And in that particular category, Jensen Huang, I think, exceeded expectations. And so we came into the open yesterday and it was kumbaya and the tech stocks were high flying. And then shortly before 11 a.m., everything kind of started to unwind. And it started with NVIDIA. And then you've got these other correlations across the market. Bitcoin started selling off at the same time. And it just, we sort of avalanched down and we went from positive territory of almost 2% to a 1.5% sell-off, which is like a 3.5% swing peak to trough, which is obviously incredibly volatile, but it shows just, I think, how thin-threaded some of the narratives can be and how quickly they can shift. And you're right, it's on the backdrop of still some tariff-related uncertainty, a government shutdown that was the longest in history, which means we've been short economic data, and everyone's trying to figure out where the puck goes next.
So I want to get to some other kind of Main Street stuff because there has been not nearly as good a news when it comes to retail in a second. But I want to get a sense from you because I feel like this is a very dangerous place for the market, and however much the market, is a reflection of how we understand the American economy, because sometimes the market talks about things that it really, really knows about. And that makes sense that we can use it as a bellwether. I don't think that the market has any idea what the AI world is, where it's going, where it could be. Now, these numbers are insane, and maybe you can say that it's overvalued because nobody wants to be left off a train that could be the cornerstone of the American tech sector or the global tech sector. But at the same time, like the AI bubble fears, nothing really changed in the last week. It was just that all of a sudden AI bubble just became a thing that people started saying more. So there's this softening, there's this sell-off, there's this pressure on the NVIDIA earnings. The NVIDIA earnings do what they've done for the last 3 years, which are very good. And then it's like, okay, well, it's good, but also, I don't know, maybe it's not. There's just like a doomer sense of this. Where does it come from? Is it just kind of what people talk about at the bars after hours in Wall Street, and the next thing you know, they show up and now they have more of an itch to sell?
Yeah, we all put on our smoking jackets. We go into the hush corridors of Wall Street where we don't let anyone else in, and then we shape the narratives for the markets. No. A lot of this is we are in an era of more heavily algorithmic trading. And so oftentimes we're at the whim of these massive computers that pick up on data signals, and they're listening to the fundamentals. So the computers are taken into account with new AI technology, of course, what a CEO has to say about the fundamentals of the company, the look under the hood, but they're also examining the technical levels on charts. So there's fundamentals and there's technicals. And oftentimes little trip ups below things like the 50-day moving average or the relative strength index will trip these computer systems into more aggressively selling or buying than they otherwise would. And that's a newer phenomenon for the markets, as opposed to, let's say, how the market traded 100 years ago, back in the day when the New York Stock Exchange was 5 trading floors, 6,000 people down here a day. There's still an element of the human auction making those decisions, but we're about 85% electronic trade volume. So it becomes more of the computers are sort of responsible for a lot of the heavy lift, and then everyone else is left to craft the narrative based on what happened there, trying to connect the dots. But the narrative does impact, then in turn, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The narrative then may impact what Jamie Dimon says on JP Morgan's quarterly call, and the computer's then going to pick up on that. So it kind of works, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah. It's, I look back at like the first big downturn in a lot of the tech stocks with like DeepSeek, which for people who are close to AI is like, oh, that's interesting. It's an interesting model, but it's not a paradigm shift in the world of this technology. The market eventually caught up to that, but there was like a 3-day sell-off, a massive sell-off that resulted to it. So it's interesting to hear that a lot of that is, it's kind of algorithmically, and then everybody tries to make sense of it the next day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm even just looking back. So the DeepSeek fueled sell-off was around January 28th. And I can pull up and see you can see the sell-off on the charts. I mean, the charts really end up telling the story. And, we've had a number of those. We had the DeepSeek fueled sell-off. We had the Japanese yen carry trade. We had the unwinding of the hedge fund basis trade. There are all these kind of like really little wonky one-offs that shake the narrative for those of us that are like living and breathing in it day to day. But ultimately, it's worth always taking a step back and saying, net from all of those little mini crises or mini intraday, not really crashes, but deep sell-offs, the market usually tends to find its legs and tends to rebound. But it's on the backdrop of, I think, more to, a general conversation about affordability and the state of the economy. As you and I have talked about many times before, the stock market is not the economy. There is arguably a correlation. But all this is, I think, the more interesting stuff on Wall Street that I'm paying more attention to are what companies like McDonald's are saying. What does Walmart say about more higher income consumers shopping for their essentials at stores like that? The American consumer is value shopping right now, and that's one of the early signs of stress. And I think, not to get into the politics of it, but that's why we're seeing such a renewed conversation from both political parties trying to put affordability at the forefront. Yeah. We're really seeing this disconnect. Because for the most part, stock market's still only about 4% off its all-time highs. For all the doomsaying and the pearl clutching we've had in recent sessions, we're still pretty much at the highest valuations we've ever been.
So let's talk about that, because the trend that me, a novice in this world, has noticed, or at least has seen the chatter of, is that it's not that the earnings at like Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, that the earnings are necessarily bad, but to your point, the guidance is not good, that they are revising down guidance compared to where the market would like to see it. Is that an accurate summation of some of the affordability worries?
At least for the companies that report, yes. It's like I said, it's one thing to do well for the quarter, but if Home Depot is projecting that the next 12 months is going to be really difficult on the home builders, and there's a lack of appetite for the big home improvement projects, well, that's sort of a signal to the market that your average U.S. consumer who would otherwise spend more money at Home Depot is feeling a little bit stretched. And then you compile that with other economic data, which, of course, from the government has been very hard to come by the last 2 months, given the shutdown. But you do have private payroll data, and you start to kind of piece together different things that shows there's a lot more strain than there has been, all in a backdrop where interest rates are still high. So there's a lot of different moving pieces that impact one another, and they're all worth kind of paying attention to.
What is let me ask you this. If there were a prescription that Wall Street would like to see from the federal government, what would it be? What sends the markets the highest?
Oh, I mean, definitely clearly communicating interest rate cuts would be first and foremost. I think this is a Fed-driven market. Trump wants to see borrowing costs lower. Ironically, people like the Elizabeth Warrens of the world also want to see interest rates lower for different reasons. But it's kind of one of those like strange bedfellows things in politics where you have like progressives and the president both advocating for the same thing. But the easing of borrowing costs across the economy would be a big one. In general, I think the tenor is we're in a more business-friendly environment from this administration that's more prone to allow merger and acquisition activity, that cut corporate tax rates. Those things make all these companies, give them a lot more breathing room. So I think some of them we've seen, but interest rates, and then trying to curtail spending, which I know is like impossible because both parties are addicted to debt and deficit conversations. They say they're not until you're in the majority, and then you end up voting in different ways. But it's one thing.
And then you end up sending $450 billion out in $200 checks, which apparently the White House is interested to do sooner rather than later.
But we get these reactions now when things like that are proposed. You see little movements in not so much the stock market, but the bond market, which is going to pay really close attention to how expensive will it be for the government to finance its debt in the long term. And that's a lot of what Capitol Hill, and I think that's what tripped up Trump the most back around Liberation Day. It wasn't really the stock market sell-off. It's that when stocks started to rebound, the bond market, the bond vigilantes came in and dug in their heels. And I think that was best in getting in the ear of the president and saying, you're not going to fool the bond market. Stocks can, kind of move. There's volatility there. But the concerns over spending and being able to finance that debt in the future, and then how much more money we have to spend on the interest on that debt is, I think, the things the market's paying attention to for government.
So I did not hear the T word. I didn't hear tariffs. Like if Donald Trump said, whoopsie, I got my point across. All these tariffs are now reversed. That doesn't sound like that's more of a political conversation than it is at least a conversation on Wall Street.
I think if Trump were to come out and say, I'm rolling back all my tariffs from the beginning of the year, I think there would be some upward pressure or some upward push in the markets for sure. We've actually already seen that a little bit, right? He's even rolled back like some of them to ease pricing pressures, which, and I've never been clear on what the goal is of tariff revenue anyway. Is it to replace income tax? Is it to pay down the debt? Is it to give out $2,000 stimulus checks? Like they're kind of moving the goalposts on a lot of what tariffs are for. And I think after that big knee-jerk reaction, we call it the April 7th lows. That was the low mark for 2025 for the S&P 500. That's when everything seemed doom and gloom. And in that one day, we officially reached a bear market, which means the S&P sold off 20% from its recent highs. We didn't close in bear market territory, but on that Monday, we hit it. But since then, I think the markets have kind of learned, like, all right, Trump is back in office. He's going to tweet different things. He's going to say different things. Don't take everything at face value because he's going to use them to negotiate, if nothing else.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things that's been fascinating to me is that, I saw a poll this morning that the majority of Americans believe that tariffs are a tax. The question was, who pays the tariff? And like 60% of Americans said the American consumer does, and then split on the other two were other countries and the companies that import them. And I found that to be fascinating, especially considering we're in this very weird realignment that it is the Republican administration that's telling people, no, this is to punish companies that are importing too much, or this is to punish other countries for putting their own tariffs on. There are other reasons outside of it where normally that would be the conservative position. That is the free trade position, that this is an eventual pass-through tax, but that's not usually where the liberal position is, which is, no, we're punishing the greedy capitalists that are doing things the wrong way.
Yeah, I think ultimately, and I do remember you and I have talked about this before, I've always thought the reason Trump loves tariffs so much is, for the most part, obviously now it's being litigated in front of the Supreme Court, this very question, but Congress has largely ceded tariff authority to the president. There have been different times in U.S. history. I think that those powers expanded under JFK, they expanded under Gerald Ford. There have been a few different presidents that have tried to take existing tariff policy, which in its current form was probably most expanded by FDR around 1934. And then Trump saying, well, this is a good negotiating tool that I and I alone can use. I don't need the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And I think they just came at such brute force where invariably you're going to have some lawsuits that now we wait to see what the Supreme Court says. For all the tariff revenue that's been collected, like if the Supreme Court overturns it, does that money have to get returned? What is the reaction then for bond market and for stock market, for everyday investors? Do you not, or everyday Americans, do you not get your stimulus checks? The Supreme Court may say we rule against the administration, but you don't have to return the revenue that you got. And at the end of the day, even the most generous estimates of how much money the government's taken in tariff revenue, dude, this is a drop in the bucket to the $6 trillion that the federal government spends every year, 6 to 7 trillion. Like a trillion is a million. Like after a while we start, like we just hear these numbers and we kind of tune them out, but like a trillion is so much larger than a million. It's so much larger than a billion. And so it sounds great to say, oh, $200 billion collected. That is genuinely such a teeny tiny percentage of how much money the government ultimately spends. So it's a fascinating story to watch itself play out here. And I guess we'll get this decision here from the court at some point.
What is the majority opinion on Wall Street on how this ends? Is there one?
The tariff situation.
Yeah, the tariff situation. The specifically the Supreme Court ruling.
Something that kind of slices the baby in half, where the businesses are legally awarded the right to have fought it and to say this is under the Constitution, this is a congressional exercise, but the government does not have to return the money it has collected. Something like that tends to be what I hear, like some kind of compromise vote. I do think the oral arguments or the early arguments that came out did catch a lot of people by surprise, that there were so many conservatives pressing the government lawyer on it. But that's probably the take I've heard. The plurality. It's not most people, but I've heard that the most.
I think the tell will be if, Trump starts settling a lot of these, starts coming to, trade agreements or frameworks with a lot of different countries before this decision comes down, right? Because ultimately, it's his ability to jerk these tariff prices around that are the leverage that anybody's in the room to begin with. Like that's the only reason why anybody is talking to him. And, if his goal in April, stock market be damned, was to hold up a crazy cardboard and with a bunch of loony numbers on it, just so the White House could ring off the hook like a telethon with the rest of the world begging to figure something out, then he achieved that goal. But I agree with you. I don't know. Everything I've read on it is that, like, if it's not directly tied to fentanyl trade, the fentanyl trade countries might survive because you can make more of an argument on IEPA there. But like the ones that have no connection to any of that, like, I don't know. That does seem legally vulnerable, at least based on how the Supreme Court justices were talking about it.
I had always thought the earliest political calculus was the fentanyl and then intellectual property pushback for China, because that's a big bipartisan one. That, China, the way Trump's fought with China has been one of those rare things where I remember Trump 1.0, he even had people like Chuck Schumer saying, yeah, Mr. President, you go
after China.
Go get them. Go after China. Play tough on them. And you don't have that very often. So, Trump's going to continue to sound off on social media and express his disapproval. And that's definitely a big one. The market is watching. But, the other big debate is what happens with the Fed chair position. Jay Powell's expected to run out his term, and that's a big one. I mean, arguably that the market's now probably more closely watching that than they are the tariff side, not to diminish trade policy, because that's impacting everyday consumers. We're in the heart of the holiday shopping season, right? Think of all the toys and electronics people are buying for Christmas. They're going to have markups because at this point, all the companies have front loaded. They're probably through their inventory that they bought in Q1 ahead of the tariff price increases. And at this point, now they're faced with some of those cost pressures. But yeah, I mean, what Trump chooses to do here with the Fed, he's already got one loyalist on in the form of Stephen Mirren. And this question of Fed independence, like the markets want to know that the Fed can make the difficult decisions over the short end of the yield curve, short-term interest rates, free of political pressure. Yeah. And I don't think the market's going to react very positively if it gets a lot more signals that this is a president who wants to get involved and wants to keep rates artificially low because it benefits him politically for the midterms.
The thought that I've had from a totally, outside the educated perspective of the financial markets was that if Trump does not get what he wants in terms of Fed rate cuts now to continued cuts, because they've already had one or two already, but if Powell says that's it, no more for this year, we're not cutting rates anymore, that the move for Trump is to essentially create name the heir now, and then have the heir go out on Twitter and say, count on these cuts, the second, retroactive to when I get in, make your decisions now for what's going to happen, because by the time that I get in, trust me, this will be priced in for how things go. Is that a possibility?
Shadow Fed chair. Yeah, that's been a big concern throughout this year, because in that situation, then people start to wonder, at what point does the market take its cues from that person? And listen, and that person could very well, I don't know how much stock you put into, no pun intended, the event contract platforms like Polymarket and all those. But for whatever it's worth, Kevin Hassett right now is the leading candidate to be named. Hassett has been the president's main economic guy through both administrations. He's right now director of the NEC. So he would be viewed as someone who's like, all right, we kind of know what Kevin brings to the table. We understand his narratives. We understand his viewpoints. But it's also this is a committee. It's never just Jay Powell. Powell's the person who comes out, does the press conference, releases the statement. But it's a rotating committee. So this is the last. I think it's December 12th or so, coming up in a couple weeks. This will be the 8th and final Fed decision of the year. And then once we get to the new calendar, we'll still have a bunch of them will stay the same, but the rest will rotate out because we have regional Fed governors. So even the voting committee itself is going to be evolving. And you really have to convince the full committee. And then half of those meetings, we get what's called the dot plot, which is the anonymous survey where they all kind of in hushed tones say where they think wages are going to go, where they think inflation is going to go. So even if I think the market knows the president gets who he wants, gets his person, XYZ, there is still inherently a checks and balance on monetary policy that I think the market's still going to rely on.
And right now, it seems like the Fed is mostly responding to increased import prices via tariffs and whatever just stubborn inflation that comes from federal spending. Are those the two big things that seem to be bedeviling the Fed from cutting rates?
I think on the one hand, it is inflation. It's basically both sides of its dual mandate. One is to stabilize prices. So it is inflation pressure. Inflation's around 3%. In the most wholesale, pure 50,000 foot view, inflation's at 3%. The Fed's always said we want it down to 2%. So it's still considered to be a little stubbornly high. The other side of the dual mandate are weakening labor market conditions. And this is where the Fed takes into account unemployment. We finally got a bit of jobs data this week. It's for September, which is insane because it's almost Thanksgiving. But we did get September jobs. And unemployment's now going the wrong direction. It's going up to 4.4. That would actually encourage the Fed to cut rates. If the economy's getting too weak, they'll bring down borrowing costs. But right now, you've got both sides of the dual mandate running into collision with each other because unemployment's high, going higher, but inflation's also going higher. So those two things tell the Fed to do two opposite actions. And I think those are probably the two things they're looking at more. If they had to pick one over the other right now, it seems to be they're a bit more focused on the labor market. They're more concerned about where wages are relative to inflation, and they're more concerned on a potential deterioration of labor market conditions, which would encourage them, in theory, to lower rates. But then when you got proposals like, hey, let's hand everyone $2,000 or Americans who qualify, that's inflationary, right? We learned that the hard way through COVID. So the Fed will have to take all that into consideration, and whoever the next Fed chairman is will have to deal with that. But I do think when all's said and done, despite the years of criticism, the markets will look at Jerome Powell as the man who, for the most part, stuck the soft landing. Not perfect, not fully mission accomplished, but really did the hard stuff at the hard time.
The transitory period was odd. That was the thing where it's like obviously the Fed chairman has become into the crosshairs of being a political animal. And I very much can understand the criticism of the Trump administration for pushing him so far into the center of that ring. But at the same time, it's hard to look at the way he was talking in 22 about how this was just, a passing transitory thing. Don't worry about it. Not this kind of generational spike that we've seen that has affected all of this so intensely. Like that to me is still the thing that kind of sticks in my craw about him.
I think that's the thing that sticks in most people's craws. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about that when we get to April and May and Powell's term is done. You'll have a lot of that get written about, okay, where is Jerome Powell's place in the history of chairman of the Fed? And I think that 2021, early 2022 transitory era is certainly going to be what people point to. The accusation basically that you started raising interest rates too late as we were empowering people with Uncle Sam bucks across the economy to go out and spend. Just like we saw, right? Trump and the Republicans passed 2 tranches of stimulus bills, and then Biden came in. And then he wanted to
pass an even bigger one.
Passed an even bigger one. And you could argue whether or not the third one was really needed, right? But ultimately, there were 3 big tranches. And we learned some Americans will save that money. Some Americans will pay off debt. But the vast majority of Americans are going to spend that money. If you spend that money, you put upward pressure on everything from eggs, like we saw spike in 2022, which has political ramifications, right? And that forces the Democrats to pass a green energy bill, but call it the Inflation Reduction Act, because we need to meet people where they are on the general affordability. And it all brings us back to affordability. And honestly, what's old is new again, because what's going to be the number one issue for the midterm? It's already midterm season. I mean, I'm shocked that we're having, I'm hearing, so I'm sure you're hearing it a lot, like that Trump's already a lame duck president. You're hearing that narrative more out of certain corridors of DC. But, we're going to be talking about all this stuff again, front and center, and purchasing power and how people feel about the economy, where perception drives reality, is, I'm sure, going to be the top issue.
Let me ask you from your guys, from the perspective of everybody that you talk to, realistically, what's best case scenario for the economy and what is worst case scenario? And let's project this out to like next summer. When people are really going to be hardening their positions on whether or not things are good or bad going into the fall election season.
Yeah, I mean, best case scenario is that the average American feels much better about his or her personal economic situation, that the average American feels if I lost my job, I could reasonably get a job. I can get a job that pays me higher wages, that pays me stronger benefits. That's the best case scenario, that we have a job market that more closely matches where we were 2 or 3 years ago, where it was a very pro job seekers market and people felt a bit more confident in their personal situation.
So that would be low. That would be low borrowing interest rates, low unemployment, higher average wages. Those would be the things that you'd be looking at from a trading perspective.
Yeah, especially, I mean, inflation's always going to go higher. It should go higher because the dollar strengthens over time inherently. But the best case is that people feel my purchasing power, my dollar gets me more than it used to get me where we were in November of last year, let's say. And then the
Gotcha.
market, again, the market does what it does for equities. It goes up about 10% a year on average is usually what people say. And so the market will do whatever it does. And there's no reason to think we're in a big bubble or anything like that. Worst case scenario is there is fear and greed comes about because in part of an unwinding of all this AI spend that we're talking a lot more about the concerns over private credit and circular financing and comparisons to the dot-com bubble. And suddenly we're in a redux of where we were for 1999 and 2000, where there was all this spend and all these companies go belly up. And then the average American sees those headlines, now starts to look at their own finances and realize, oh, my purchasing power is not very strong. I cannot get a job. And then usually history politically tells us voters punish whoever the incumbent is for situations like that. And there have been concerns from CEOs that say, we could see, because of AI and automation, we could see a huge spike in unemployment. We could see unemployment go north of 5%. We could see it go up to 6, 7, 8% in the next few years. Like an unexpected spike in unemployment to me would be the worst case scenario, which would cause the Fed to cut interest rates for all of the wrong reasons. And then we're talking much more about a feeling of panic across the U.S. economy. That's worst case.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to see that in the next 6 months. Just from my point of view in the AI, I'll put it this way. I'm a huge bull. I'm a bullish AI guy. I believe in I'm an optimist for a lot of this, but I don't think that the tech is where the doomer fears believe it is. I think that there's a lot of things that can and will happen, but it would not shock me if next year we are talking more about a lower interest rate environment that has a bunch of different companies that are exploding, that have products that people really like because they are based on AI technologies, as opposed to, and then they are hiring, as opposed to like now all of a sudden 25% of America doesn't have a job because a robot done did it. But That's just my thought. All right. So that would be the big fear is, that there is like, and just to give people a sense, how much of the market right now, the positive driver of the market is AI investment?
I mean, right now it's something like almost a 1/4, somewhere between a fourth and a third of the S&P 500 is like the top 10 tech stocks.
That's wild.
Those are what we call the Mag 7. That's Nvidia, Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, throw Tesla in there. If you expand that list, it's companies like AMD, Oracle, central to all of that. And so for a day like today, without knowing because I don't have the full list in front of me, but I'm looking up at the big board, the S&P 500 is up 0.7%. So about 0.73%. Without knowing for sure, I would say, okay, well, that tells me tech and discretionary stocks are doing the heavy lifting, but oftentimes that comes at the expense of healthcare and consumer staples and kind of the more defensive rotation. So we're in a very top heavy, very consolidated market that is also drawing some historical comparisons that are at least worth noting. Doesn't necessarily mean doom and gloom. We're in this is a technology driven equities market for sure.
The one thing that I think is different between this and that 90s.com boom. So for kids, we're not talking about the Great Recession. We're talking about, back in the dial-up days. Ask your parents. But like it doesn't seem like the P&E is really all that out of whack for a lot of those companies that we're talking about that are really driving this. Like, yes, there's a lot of investment. Yes, there is a generational promise of rollout for infrastructure, but at least the companies that are putting their money into it don't seem like they're crazy in terms of the P&E.
I mean, the forward-looking multiples they're high. They're high for sure. But I think one of the differences that so many of the .com companies were not yet publicly traded, which means we did not have quarterly earnings for a lot of them. Some of them we did.
Yeah.
But a lot of them were still in I think so many more of the companies in the .com era were closer to like an Anthropic or an OpenAI or a company that's still private. Whereas now one of the differences I hear is, okay, if you look at who's really doing a lot of the spending on the data center build out and the what they call the picks and shovels of the AI trade, right? We're not going to do the compute, but we'll invest in the infrastructure and the energy, the picks and shovels of it. Those are publicly traded companies, and so that forces quarterly calls with investors for NVIDIA and Meta and Microsoft and Oracle and all these other companies that I mentioned. So, all the more reason, again, not to bring it back to Trump needlessly, but, Trump this year is like, oh, maybe companies shouldn't have to report quarterly earnings. Maybe we should scale that back. Because I'm sure the business community said to him, Mr. President, we would love to report earnings less frequently. It's a big lift for us to do so. But I would argue this is the exact type of environment where we should be hearing
you want them,
Satya Nadella and Jensen Huang and Mark Zuckerberg at least 4 times a year to really get a sense under the hood and get a sense on what you think about the year ahead. It's a fascinating
because
time.
you do have this kind of rising behemoth that isn't accountable to any kind of market pressure, and that is OpenAI, where who knows? Maybe this is a thing that topples the entire economy. Maybe it swallows the economy. Like we have no idea that the range of possibilities over the next year, I guess, as it gears up by public reporting to IPO is massive. Like we have no idea.
Yeah, for now, if there's one company that trades publicly, kind of a proxy, you'd argue it's probably Microsoft because they're the ones who have made the highest investments in it. But Microsoft's obviously its own standalone business. Yeah, in terms of potential expected IPOs, obviously that one is at the very top of the list.
All right. JD Durkin, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find more of your work?
I'm across socials at JD_Durkin. I think that's the handle. And I'm hosting the daily Closing Bell show here at the New York Stock Exchange every day. First of its kind. It's called Taking Stock. We're live on most social media platforms. X, Twitter is definitely our biggest. And I absolutely love doing it, man. This is an incredible institution I work in. It's hundreds of years old. It's the first of its kind live show every day, right underneath the Closing Bell show. So I hope some people will check it out.
Absolutely. We encourage everybody to do it. JD, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, brother.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics brought to you by you, everybody who supports this show. If you don't support the show, head on over to takepoliticsseriously.com. We didn't do an update in the middle of the show because I wanted to get this out as soon as possible for you guys, and we're kind of running up against it. So takepoliticsseriously.com. We'll do a little bit of a plug back here. You get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. It's just so simple. Head on over there. Subscribe. I think since we talked, we're like a plus 76 Substack in politics and rising. Join the team. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Find us on X, on Instagram, on TikTok, Justin R. Young. Find us on YouTube at Politics. And if you want your name read on the show, the only place to do it is at our foundational tier, like these fine folks: Sonny Black, L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Nick, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes, Neil, Casey. Oh yeah, it's Adam. AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, The Borge B, Michael, Matt, DP4 Bongo, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Paul, Gloria Young, who'll be on the show next week, A Dog Named Truckers, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Steven, and Zombie Doc. You want to join their ranks? One place to do it, takepoliticsseriously.com. Next week, my mom's going to be on the show, whether she likes it or not. And no episode on Friday because we're taking it off for Thanksgiving. But everybody will get their bonus episodes. So sign up just in case something happens. Till then, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, still more discuss politics, but this is the only one that dares discuss. Hole 3.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.